cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred.
Next, to share more about our forum theme, Emerging, Wayfinding, Igniting, is my regional network committee teammate, arts advocate, prankster, and longtime community event producer for Burning Man, the dapper and the bearded Stephen Raspa.
Thank you, Iris. So as Iris mentioned, our theme for this regional network forum is Emerging, Wayfinding, Igniting. And I'd like to share with you why we selected such a theme. As we emerge and adapt to the new normal of this moment that we find ourselves in, we have to first admit that not everyone is in the same place and the world around us feels very different than a little over a year ago. This year's intended Burning Man theme, The Great Unknown, still has relevance as we re-enter the social world. It remains a time of great loss, but also of rare opportunity. It offers a chance to reevaluate, reconnect, and return to the values that brought us together in the first place. But now we must ask how these values serve us in the world we now share. What has changed, if anything, and how might we change for the better? What really matters? And how can the work that we do in the world create inspiration and positive social impact? Our 2020 European Leadership Summit theme was Human Being Being Human, and it raised questions about what it means to be a fully embodied person in relationship to oneself, to society, and the natural world. Little did we know how relevant that thematic embarkation would be and the journey we would go on individually and collectively as a result of the global pandemic. Never has the connection between aloneness and togetherness at the same time been so real and poignant. We are still in this unusual moment, still finding our way through it and back together. Some of us are emerging from isolation as if grateful butterflies from a cautious cocoon. Others are still sheltering in place and suffering, while others are healing, but struggling with the balance between personal well-being and collective community needs. So we want to provide this forum to regather in a way that can be flexible and meet one another wherever we are, you are, emotionally, psychologically, and energetically. So we really hope that each of you finds something healing, helpful, and encouraging about today, and that we can use this time together as a way to self-reflect and consider what our culture can offer the world next. We welcome you as community leaders, culture hackers, and makers of better possible realities. We thank you for the often very challenging work that you do in service of others and our global community. And we love you. I'm going to say it again. We love you. Please know you're loved and that we all are together in this, even if we are in different parts of the world and in different stages of experiencing what we're going through. We hope that today helps you to emerge, recalibrate where you stand, and ignite where you want to go and how to get there best together. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce our next panel, entitled, What Does It Mean to Be a Burner in 2021? The panel is moderated by Not That Dave Koren, who is founder, executive producer, and executive director of FIGMENT, and has served as both a New York City regional contact and member of the Meta Regionals Committee. Our esteemed panelists are Marlon Williams of Living Cities and Burning Man Project's Radical Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Advisory Committee. Monique Schiess, who you heard from a moment ago, who is founding member of AfrikaBurn and a Burning Man regional contact in Cape Town, South Africa. And Kevin Rowell of Blissfit's Retirement Village Camp, who has a rich and varied background in disaster relief, community resilience, and events. Take it away, Not That Dave.
Stephen, thank you so much. I want to welcome everybody to this conversation. We, the panelists, have been having this conversation for the last few days in some different rounds, and we're thrilled to kind of open this up and share it with you and share some of the thoughts we've been thinking. And I'm really happy to be joined on this panel by Monique Schiess, Kevin Roche, and Marlon Williams today. So we wanted to kind of reflect on what's happened and what might come next. Stephen, it was great to hear you talk about the potential for what can come next and how we all try to discover what this new normal is. We certainly haven't found it yet. I mean, normal hasn't happened yet. We're still in a period of great uncertainty. I mean, the world has changed. We've changed. And so the question of what does it mean to be a burner in 2021 is incredibly timely and poignant because so much has happened in the last 15 months and nobody knows what comes next. As one thing I've been thinking about over the last few days as we started preparing for this is that there used to be this idea of a default world. There used to be a default world. And what Burning Man and all of our events and our experiences and what we were creating together was creating an alternative, creating somewhere that could be more creative, more expressive, where we could be our truer selves in a default world. And what's happened, I think, through this period is that the thing has flipped completely, and the default world is no longer default. It's completely unpredictable. It's uncertain. And I feel like in myself and others I talk to, we want to get back to events so that we can hug each other again. We can have some sense of predictability. And so this is a time of incredible potential, and that we can realign our relationship with the world as individuals and as a collective. Monique, thank you for showing that video a few minutes ago. I know that you and I talked about this yesterday, and specifically around politics. And I wonder if you could speak for a minute about political activism.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I resonate with what's kind of your kind of preamble, because there was always that moment where Michael described how they went to the desert and he drew a line in the sand, and they said on the other side of this line, everything will be different. And I almost feel like with the kind of plasticity that exists in the world at the moment, like our challenge is to actually step back over that line in quite a bold manner, and go, actually on this side of the line now, everything's going to be different too. Because I feel very strongly that the kind of last 30 years of Burning Man, and certainly, my last 15 years of AfrikaBurn has kind of, there's two things functional there, and that is the model of what we do. It's that space creation, it's the open source model, it's an abundance model. It's like, here's a space, determinate, make it beautiful, make it meaningful, make it, all the things that are amazing. And what we've done in those years is that we've exercised these muscles with various, self-organization muscles, ingenuity, collaboration, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like, I mean, in the early days, when we started AfrikaBurn, I remember kind of like supporting a no nuke kind of initiative at some point, and I got rapped over the knuckles for having taken a bit of a political stance, which was correct. I didn't want to assume that everyone was a no nuker, but I feel like at this juncture, I do feel like it's important for us to get involved on a political level, and I don't mean the kind of power wielding, backstabby kind of political thing, but I mean politics in terms of the way that we organize ourselves. We are brilliant at organizing ourselves with a foundational kind of impetus, and the foundational kind of drive has got its taproot in anarchy, in the generosity of bohemianism, in the crazy, mad, renegade, techie collaboration world, the loving world. There's just so much good foundational stuff in there that I feel like there's actually not, it's not actually an option to not kind of try really affect what was the default world. And I feel very strongly that there are two items which I feel like can be, that they don't necessarily need to be items that are no touch items, and that is integration. I don't feel like anyone in this world can be passive about integration, and I don't think that we can be passive about the environmental imperatives in our world. So I feel like those could be seen to be political subjects, but they're absolutely fundamental. And so my very personal stance is that, I mean, I only got involved in starting AfrikaBurn because of that. I felt like it was a manner to change the world, where fun and play and accessing your creativity and that kind of thing is the vector for change. And I feel like it's a moment in time where we must take the plasticity of the default world at the moment and do some brave shit, you know?
Because everything's up for grabs, right? The whole conversation is open about what is the default world. It used to be like we couldn't talk about religion and politics, like don't do that at work. And now everything's open and we have to be more active.
Absolutely. And
Marlon,
I mean, that's what burns do. They teach you how to be active. And then by default, that makes you an activist.
Absolutely. Marlon, can we get you into this?
Of course. Yeah, so I love the framework that you're using. I think I try to be literal sometimes. There's like an old Baptist preacher inside of me who's like, when you say a word, you define the word. And as Burning Man, I actually think about what that means. It's about setting people on fire. And literally that concept, right? We went to that place to set ourselves on fire. But now we're living in a world where all of the world is on fire, and that's this great opportunity to burn down and let go of things that didn't serve us, and also to step into things because of the urgency of the moment and the need for connection, because the trauma of the experience of COVID is about disconnection, to figure out how we actually reconnect again, both with each other and with ourselves. We talked a little bit about like what does it mean to think about being political, and in my training around racial equity work, I really think about political as an exercise in power to shape the reality that you want. And going to Burning Man, going to Black Rock City, what we do there is we go and like create this alternative world of play and delight and amusement. And also, and I always found it silly that we would think that once we cross that line that you talked about, Monique, that we can only do it there. Right. And so for me, Burning Man actually starts when you leave Burning Man. It's about getting ignited there, but you actually walk back into the world on fire, and you want to create art. You want to get be more deeply connected with people. You want to figure out ways in which you can create play and moments for spontaneity and joy. And that's actually how I've really thought about this time when the burn in Black Rock City has been canceled. How do I actually spark opportunities for joy and connection, and particularly among communities of color?
Because once you understand it, once you go to the desert or go to your event and internalize that experience, and it becomes part of you, you take it with you. Mm-hmm. And then as you act in the world, you're acting from that place. You're able to touch that place inside yourself and then act in the world.
Yeah, Burning Man's not a place. It's actually a community, and it's a way of thinking about how we can be in conversation together. When we think about like the fact that we have these principles, it's about trying to create a collective governance that works in the desert, but also lasts outside. And what I've found really beautiful is that we think that the principles of Burning Man are like unique and special unicorn, but they actually have existed within communities all over the world for forever, and it's really about a refinding. I love Toni Morrison's idea of rememory, of how we are always constantly remembering things we used to know. And for me, the principles of Burning Man are a rememory. It's a remembering that community and interdependence are really key values that have allowed all people across time and place to connect and thrive together.
So somehow it's inherent in us, and we're finding it. Mm-hmm. We're finding a space inside ourselves that already exists.
Yeah.
When we explore in this way. Kevin, I know you're on the phone. Can we add you to this conversation?
I think I'm here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, what an inspirational group of people to be able to speak with. And I just want to extend my gratitude to the community for making space for this kind of conversation, and for bringing all of us together to really examine what the opportunity is. You know, as somebody who comes from sort of a cross-disciplinary background, both running event operations, but then also working in disaster relief and mitigation in different scenarios around the world, I always wonder, you know, like all the things bring us together. You know, it's always about coming together, and there's always common threads of culture and music and art and food and very, you know, sort of ritualistic aspect of human survival. And as we emerge from this last year specifically, very acutely, but also as we head into the world that is coming around us, been listening really closely to just a lot of common themes. Environmental and social degradation are, kind of at an all-time high, right? We have a very polarized world, not just here in the US, but globally. Specifically, one of the things I pay close attention to is displacement. Like today, we're at 80 million displaced people globally, and over the next 30 years, according to UN studies, we will be at 1 billion displaced globally. Displacement can include, refugees from violence, as in Kutupalong refugee camp, where 1.2 million people had to flee genocide in 2017, really over the course of 30 years, in Myanmar, and they fled to Bangladesh, and now have to provide for all the things that they need are now coming from a place that they've never been before. I look at situations like what happened in the infrastructure failures in Texas, and I look at the fires and the recovery from the fires, or slow process to recovery that's happening in both Northern California and Southern Oregon and other places along the West Coast. And one of the ironies that always hit me about event production as an operations director was like, leave no trace as a concept was really beautiful because it's, cleaned up our campsites and made it so that we didn't have to pick up a bunch of garbage. But what I actually saw was all the 40-yard containers getting shoved off into the landfill. And of course, the dedication and commitment of our green teams and sustainability teams, and then obviously patrons as well, created diversion tactics, et cetera. But we weren't really like leaving no trace. We're just taking the shit and putting it somewhere else. And so all of the confluence of these influencing factors in my own head have led to this, so what else is there? How do we leverage the power of gathering to, weave an architecture of social resilience so that when the inevitable catastrophes strike, either nationally or regionally or hyper-locally, there is better ability to recover from them. And I think this is where, a lot of amazing things have come out of the past year. I mean, I'm sure that actually probably everyone who's listening and participating today has stories of community coming together in a positive way. We call this mutual aid in many instances. There's like more formal relationships of it, and then there are less formal things. When your neighbor's house catches on fire and you grab a bucket of water and go try to help put it out, that is also mutual aid. It's a lot of what we do on the playa when we find people who are in harm. It's a big factor in what we would call integrated harm reduction, inclusive of psychosocial support services, whether you're tripping on LSD or gone straight 5150 and having a psychotic episode. And so it's in this conversation about what the regional burns mean, and then how we bring and just weave these pieces together and with a little more consciousness, because it is effort to produce an event, it's effort to make things. And so the question myself and others are asking is, can we use this year to leave a trace for good? Can we use this opportunity to leverage the energy that we would normally put into Burning Man itself or into our other events and aspects of our life, and really leverage those for our community? So sorry for the long rant there, but thank you for a chance to share a little of what's coming out for me.
No, that's great, Kevin. Thank you. I mean, I want to ask a question that sort of underlies what you were saying. You mentioned using the power of gathering. I think one of the big questions coming out of this at this moment is what is the future of gathering? What is the future of convening? What is the future of events themselves? Right? Here we are. We're meeting from around the world, all of us on this call. Like, this has become normal. Is this normal now? Is this what we do? Is this how we convene? To what extent do we get together in person again? When is that appropriate? When does that make economic sense? When does that make sense in terms of time and resources? Would any of the panelists like to pick up on that?
Come on, David. You can't use the word normal with a group of burners. That's just bad taste. I think Normal is not the best word to use. I think like what for me it's like what creates impact and what creates connection, right? Like the reason why we haul out our shit into a car and like go off to the desert is because we want connection. The reason why we go over to people's houses or to share a meal or we get on Zoom is because what we really crave is connection. And so really thinking about like what are the tools that allow for connection and and how can that facilitate it for different for really different situations. Sometimes like I can't because I care about the environment or just not economically possible for me to like fly across the country to see my friends, but I want to connect. So Zoom provides a space there versus other times where I'm like, I just need a sweaty, dusty hug and I just need to get to that person, right? And so it's about, for me, understanding the method that allows you to have the type of connection that you want, and being thoughtful about like what creates that interpersonally, and also what creates that as we go at scale and at mass. It's not the how, but it's the how do you feel afterwards, and really centering that that piece of it for me allows us to make decisions about how we gather, when we gather, and the protocols we put in place in order to value safety and also really center connection.
If I may,
Yeah.
I just yeah.
Please.
I think one of the most, I just want to put it back to the kind of the burn model and I think that one of the fundamental mechanisms at play in the burn model is the harsh environment, because to a degree that developed as a counterpoint to the passively consumptive society that the default world kind of presented. And so yes, Zoom and all this online kind of revolution has been a very useful thing, but the absolute longing to go and have an embodied experience is quite fundamental. And I think that is why the learning from Burning Man and burns in the world are so powerful, because it's experiential learning. It's not an intellectual pursuit. And that brings home that kind of, because it's in the shared struggle that we build relationship, and everything about it is about relationship. It's about relationship to yourself, about relationship to others, to the environment, to your creative self, I mean, the list is endless. And so I, for one, am desperate to gather physically again. But I think that there's some of the new normal is this kind of Zoom environment, which is fantastic. It really has been amazing to see that grow, but I cannot wait to get into the real world and have the world rub up against me really hard, like a beige out, a white out, a windstorm, hunkering down, and because that's the alchemy. That's where a lot of the alchemy happens.
One of the things that we've talked about in some of our conversations, and I can't remember which of the panelists we talked about this with exactly, or if it's even anybody that's here, or we have another panel later on today we'll be doing with some of the same panelists and some different panelists. But one thing that we've talked about a little bit in some of these conversations is how it's gotten more challenging to do events through the same period over the last few years, and how those challenges have manifested. And I think just in terms of the logistics of doing events and the legal requirements and the community oversight and those kind of things. And in some of the other conversations, we've also talked about governance issues and how there's a growing disappointment on a lot of sides with our governments, and how what we do as burners, as organizers of events, is create structures that hold space for people. Monique, you and I talked about this, and it's interesting that we're doing something that governments don't seem to understand how to do exactly, but that we believe is fundamentally necessary, right? Is this creating space for people to explore and bond and build community?
Yeah. So
Yeah, and that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Marlon, Kevin, then Marlon.
Well, yeah. I was just going to say quickly, and what's interesting as an event organizer is you weave yourself into the position of being the interstitial communication device. And now what we're going to see this summer is a much more fractal or less integrated event happening in the desert. That's not to say there's not communication and coordination, but it'll just be interesting because it's like, what happens when a community self-organizes around doing a thing that for years and years and years was a much more linked and coordinated activity. And so I think there's going to be a lot of learning that comes out of this year.
Absolutely.
And this may be, and for me, so when if you wake me up in the middle of the night and you ask me like, what are my identities? I go burner, so I go black man first, bureaucrat second, and burner is third, like in that order. It was really important. And the bureaucrat in me really believes in the power of government to create containers for experiences and for dreams. It is not actually to create the dreams themselves, but it's about to create the container within which all those things become possible for everybody who's doing that shared and collective dreaming. And then part of why I love Black Rock City, not specifically Burning Man as a community, but Black Rock City, is that it is designed with the intention of being a container for dream making. It's not telling folks what to do, but giving people the permission, possibility, and opportunity to do dreaming that is both individual and collective. And when I go in my work, when I work with governments, I try to bring that ethos and that value back into that space. That for me is part of the breaking down of the distinction between Black Rock City and the default world, where we think about government not as oppressive or as like a big brother, but actually one that whose primary responsibility is creating the container, not making all the dreams come true, but creating the container where all dreams are possible. And that orientation about how we make rules, how we provide services, how we create the infrastructure for opportunity, I think has really liberated me in my work, where I try to be at the intersection of racial equity movements and governance together. And when you think about container building, rather than governance in the traditional way, it's provided a lot of new opportunities. And so what I see us doing is we bring Black Rock City into not being a place in the desert, but actually a place we all live wherever we all are. We start to create containers for that joy. I love the description before about the work they did in Seattle. You're creating little containers, and people felt the joy, and then they wanted to create things within it. And the best part of being within this community and spreading this community out is that you actually don't know what's going to happen. You create a container of possibility, and then the world happens around it. And even in those who are creating the container, they have delight too. And that for me is one of the most beautiful experiences that we practice on Playa, and then we bring that out into the world.
Marlon, I think you're much more optimistic about governments than I am.
I know.
I share your view about Black Rock City and the events we create, absolutely. But I see it, in my experience, I see governments, trying to increase economic investment as their default position, as opposed to creating possibility for people.
Well, that's what governments have been, not what they should and could be, right? And so actually going to Burning Man is what made me a better bureaucrat. It taught me this idea about dreaming. It taught me about how about communal effort and how we actually make that work together, and the idea about making everyone a participant. Like this, the citizens. When we think about citizens, there's usually this distinction that's very false between those who govern and those who are governed. But when you bring in participation as an element with civic responsibility, you actually break down those boundaries and you create a very new dynamic that is really exciting that I'm trying to bring into the default world.
Wonderful. Well, I think we have to, having opened all those boxes, we have to wrap up now and let people get onto their breakout sessions. We're going to, as I said, we're going to do it again in a few hours for those of you that are awake and that makes sense to be beyond then with a somewhat different but related panel. And so I want to thank the panelists for joining me in this conversation, Monique, Kevin, and Marlon. It's been great having this conversation with you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Not That Dave, Marlon, Monique, and Kevin for sharing your thoughts about what does it mean to be a burner in 2021.
Cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred. Cook it with emotion. You gotta cook it, treat it like it's sacred. Gonna make some music together. Beautifuls, it is fantastic to see you again.